John Muir Way, Day 9, North Berwick to Dunbar, 15 miles, in which I didn't get stung and we walked 135 miles. We had breakfast booked for 7:30, wanting to make an early start. The difficult decision was what to wear. The rain was coming and going and the forecast didn't want to commit. I opted for shorts and a raincoat. Ed went for his usual fleece, but with trousers rather than shorts. We both put the rain covers on our rucksacks. Our clothing choices were to prove controversial. We left at 8:20 and Sue began walking uphill for the next 2 miles. After a slight wrong turn and, with a helpful suggestion volunteered by a local who said we'd missed the turn, we went through a posh gate and were back on track. The John Muir Way guide offered the suggestion of an optional climb up Berwick Law. That's the big hill that sits above North Berwick. After an extensive discussion, weighing up the pros and cons that lasted 1.5 seconds, we elected not to take up the option of going up the law and continued on our way. I realised why the weather forecast was non-committal, because the weather was having a listless day. Should I sunshine or should I rain? Maybe I'll drift this way or that. Fair enough. We all have days like that and we can't seem to do much, but that's where the clothing choices started to prove important. Glad I'm not wearing a raincoat, be a bit warm, says Ed. Glad I'm not wearing trousers, let the listener understand, I replied. As we neared the top of our climb, the path opened into fields. We passed a couple of joggers coming in the opposite direction. The second of these, a more elderly gentleman, stated with a stiff upper crust, "A fine morning." "Yes, sir," I barked in reply as I stood to attention. I didn't, boringly, I just said, "It is." His wife, perhaps, followed closely on a bicycle, and as she looked me up and down, she said, "I wouldn't want to be carrying your load." I thanked her for a kind thought and we headed down the hill. The paths became more grassy, with nettles and thistles hiding in amongst them, ready to catch the unwary. "Glad I'm not wearing shorts," said Ed. "Looking a bit warm in those trousers," I replied. And whilst I could unzip my jacket, Ed couldn't unzip his trousers without creating a public order offence. In order to win this battle, I knew I had to avoid getting stung, so my eyes were fixed firmly on the path. Didn't see any of the scenery for the next 10 miles. A hop, skip and a jump here and there, weaving in and out. Just call me Ninja Nick. I didn't follow Ed too closely as he was laying nettle traps, brushing them with his trousers so they sprang back, but I leapt like a gazelle, in my mind at least, because my legs were starting to feel the strain of the past week. We passed a farm come factory that might have been producing fertiliser. Just be glad that you can't smell the photograph. And then on my app nav, I saw on the elevation profile a pimple. Said pimple was actually a long hill approaching. The sun had turned up the heat, so I decided to take my coat off. As I unfastened the rucksack buckles, the wind picked up and the clouds came, so I kept my jacket on and refastened my buckles. As we passed the kennels, all the dogs came out to laugh at me as I started to slog up the hill. I'm not saying I was slow in arriving at the top, but by the time I got there, I was gratified to see Ed had built a bench for us to have a breather. We were now nearly halfway. Of course, halfway in distance, as I have learnt in this past week, is not the same as halfway in time, unless you happen to be crossing the Forth Bridge, which has its own time zone. Heading down into East Linton, where the fire station wished us a Merry Christmas. The rain tried, but fortunately didn't put in much of an effort at that point. As we left the village, we saw a sign, Dunbar, 6 3/4. This was exciting. The end was near, rather like my legs and feet. The overgrown paths returned. "Glad I'm wearing trousers," said Ed. "Looking a bit warm there," I replied. We then came to a sign saying Ford Eek. It looked quite deep. Then, fortunately, spotted a path off to the left which led to a footpath. I continued to evade the nettles. Just under 5 miles to go, and the rain came properly the first time in our whole journey. Ed had to stop to put on his raincoat. I simply zipped mine up. "Thank you, rain." The rain lasted for about 15 minutes and then suddenly we came upon the coast and the John Muir Country Park. The sandy paths were now damp and for the first time my boots became muddy. We passed an emu and a llama and carried on. Well, you would, wouldn't you? Ed tried and in the end succeeded removing his raincoat without stopping walking, but it was quite a complicated process which included me tugging on his sleeve. It would have been quicker to stop, but we were not going to be tricked into that. By this time, and with about 3 miles to go, my thighs were straining, my feet hurt a lot. But most importantly, I still hadn't been stung. The last part of the path followed the coast and cliffs, which inspired John Muir's lasting love of nature and simply allowing the wild to be wild, inspiring him to create the world's first national park system. What a gift that has grown and lasted and encourages us to ask, what gifts are we bequeathing to future generations? Of course, the last couple of miles was littered with so many steps up and down that slowed me even more. Then climbing up a particularly lengthy set of steps, I was met with the wonderful vision of Petra coming towards me. She and Phoenix had come to meet us. At the top, they each took a hand and helped pull me along. Soon, or eventually, we reached the High Street of Dunbar, passing another Methodist church shared with the Episcopal Church, and then past the museum, which is the house of John Muir's birthplace, which I thought was the end of the bay, but wasn't because that was still 200 yards down the road to John Muir's statue. Every day I'm shuffling, and then there it was, the statue, and for us the end. And I haven't been stung, so think I made the right clothing choice, thank you very much. We sat on the nearby bench for lunch, and naturally a passing old man asked if he could sit there as well. I instantly identified with the painful shuffle and said of course he could. Ed went to the co-op and bought us all drinks, and then we went to the ice cream and sweet shop so I could get us all an ice cream. Talking to Gavin, the owner, he was impressed by our feet, by what we'd done, not the feet on the end of our legs. And he gave not just me a free ice cream, but also Ed and Petra and Phoenix, as they were part of the support team, he said. What a lovely chap. So if you're ever in Dunbar, do visit the sweet shop on the High Street, where it's £1 a gram for the pick and mix. Phoenix paid £3 for 368 grams. Ed was slightly miffed that he'd bought the drinks and I got the ice cream for free. Returning to the house, we were met by some kind ladies who issued us with certificates to say we'd walked 134 miles along the John Muir Way. It was 135 actually, but I wasn't going to quibble, although the extra mile was significant, just saying. When you add in all the other bits, it had been a total of 151 miles in 9 days across some amazing terrain and heritage. We've been very lucky with the weather, and apart from Ed bruising his foot early on and then somewhat carelessly losing a toenail yesterday, we'd come away with no blisters and nothing more than aching limbs and sore feet. We saw Ed on his bus to Edinburgh. Having booked his train to Carlisle from Edinburgh, the connecting train from Dunbar disappeared from the timetable. And so we finished as we had started. The end. Almost.